Hello, Pentax Tips here, and today we have a Pentax LX for an overview training video. The LX is a 35mm film SLR camera released in 1980. This coincided with the 60th anniversary of the Asahi Optical Company, which may explain the Roman numerals used in the name. However, I like to think the LX stands for luxury because, well, as far as manual operation goes, this camera is the pinnacle Pentax product for their 35mm range. I say this because the LX is a system camera, or modular system. This harkens back to 1969 with the professional medium format cameras of the Pentax 6x7 lineup. This means the Pentax LX has an extensive catalog of accessories, including various interchangeable viewfinders, focus screens, a bulk film loader, data backs, hand grips, motor drives, and winders. Something really interesting, even for such a rugged early film camera, the Pentax LX has weather and dust seals around all buttons and dials, something quite unique compared to Pentax competitors for the time. Pentax is still very well known for their impressive weather sealing. Also interesting, many commemorative and anniversary models of the Pentax LX have been issued, including the Pentax LX 2000, the Pentax LX Gold, Pentax LX Titanium, and the Pentax LX Titan. Also, the new half-frame film camera Pentax release called the Pentax 17 contains two features that harkens back to the famous Pentax LX legacy: the film rewind assembly, and the color schema from the Pentax LX 75th Special Year Edition model. We're going to cover all aspects of the Pentax LX, including many of the available attachments. Please check the timestamps in the description to jump to specific topics. And the front of the camera contains flash connectors on one side and a lever on the other. Let's quickly cover these. The top here is an FP flash port, and below is our X sync, which is used for most external flash sync. And below that is a through-the-lens flash port, providing information from the internal metering system to dedicated external flashes that can adjust the flash strength accordingly. The lever on the left can actually perform three different functions. First, most obviously, the lever is a self-timer. Make sure your exposure is set correctly and your film is advanced. Now you can rotate the self-timer lever down by pressing the middle button and rotating counterclockwise. To start the self-timer, press the shutter release. The gearbox will begin slowly rotating back into its starting position, and when it gets there, the exposure is taken. More inconspicuously, the lever, when pushed in the opposite direction, actuates a lever in the mirror box that stops down the lens for a depth of field preview. And last, the button in the middle can be pressed while turning the lever towards the mirror box to activate mirror lockup. This feature removes the potential for mirror shock and camera shake during long exposure photography. Located at these three corners are special camera strap lugs that support either horizontal or vertical carry. You'll need special fasteners for the LX that slip over top of the lugs and lock into place by pressing the protruding solid bar along the base of the fasteners with a coin. To remove the strap, press the coin on the other side of the fastener with the double bars, and this will slide the locking plate over, allowing you to remove the fastener. This bottom corner contains a screw port to accept various available hand grips that also attaches to the top strap lug. Pentax even released a chunk of wood that would properly fit onto the LX, but allowing you to carve yourself a customized grip. The LX contains the venerable K-mount. In fact, any K-mount lens with an aperture ring can be used perfectly fine on this camera, providing full open aperture metering. And with a cheap, genuine adapter, the entire massive catalog of M42 lenses can also be used on the LX with stomp-down metering. To remove the lens, press down on the release button and rotate counterclockwise to pop off the lens. To reattach the lens, match up the dots on the lens and the camera body, and insert the lens bayonet and rotate until you hear a click. The back of the camera, we have the camera film back door and the film reminder holder. The door can be removed by pulling up on the rewind crank 2 positions to open the back. Then on the inside hinge, you can push down on this little hinge slider to retract a retainer pin, and the door comes right off. To replace the door, While holding down the slider, line up the hinge and then release the slider. You can see at the very bottom of the back of the camera contains electrical contacts for use with different film backs available for the LX. While the Pentax Watch Data LX contains a timepiece that will record and display the instant time a photo is taken down to the day, hour, minute, second, the Pentax Dial Data LX will display an alphanumeric code of your choice dialed in with these 3 double dials. For the Dial Data LX, you'll need to utilize a small film blind on the inside of the camera, rotated into place with this thumb screw. The blind creates a small area in the corner of your images that will display the dial data information. This will allow you to manually code in things such as year, month, day, or f-stop, shutter speed, ISO, or any other combination you wish to use. The bottom of the camera contains our regular tripod screw mount and our film rewind release button. For use with a winder or motor drive, there's a film transport rate control coupler and relay pin. Here is the camera's unique serial number. Here we have 2 little rubber grips to reduce the chance of the camera slipping on smooth surfaces. We have our batteries located under this screw-on cover. The LX requires 2 1.5 volt batteries called LR44 button cells, which are cheap and easily available. The 2 batteries stack on top of each other with the positive sign facing down away from the camera. You can see the battery cover has a positive sign indicating the polarity direction. To test the battery, simply look to see if any of the lights come on in the viewfinder when pressing down the shutter. And here we have the accessory's electrical contacts, along with 2 screw-on covers that reveal a coupler for the automatic advance and a port to access the film canister for automatic rewinding. While in use, the LX winder has 2 screw ports to store away the bottom panel access covers. The winder has a rewind lever on the left and a switch to choose a drive mode of either C for continuous burst, off in the middle, or an S for single shots. On the bottom of the winder is a tripod screw mount, a film rewind release button, and a battery release button. The winder takes 4 AA batteries. The winder also accepts a remote release cable through the port accessed under this rubber cover. The winder attaches to the camera via the camera's screw mount using the winder's top dial. With this attached winder, we can continuously shoot at 2 frames per second. While the more expensive motor drive could achieve up to 5 frames per second. In addition, automatic rewinding of the film roll is now possible. Also a quick note here, if you're in automatic mode, or any of the slower shutter speeds requiring electronic shutter, and then you try to use the camera without batteries, or if your batteries die while you're in use, the mirror will lock up as a reminder that the camera is not being powered to produce accurate exposures at those shutter speeds. So to drop the shutter back down, simply rotate the shutter dial to a faster speed not requiring electronic shutter. At the top left of the camera, stored away, is the film rewind crank. Lifting up the crank to a position it sits comfortably, and then pulling up a second time will release the film back door. The rewind crank is sitting on top of a larger dial. Inlaid at the bottom of this dial contains your ASA selection. This is equivalent to our more modern ISO standard of film speed. You can select your ASA by pressing this little button on the left-hand side and rotating the outer rim of the dial. Here you can select between an ASA of between 6 and 3200. Located to the right of this dial is a white marker for our exposure compensation. Currently here it's set to 1x to produce a regular exposed image. If you think your desired image could benefit from being slightly brighter or darker, you can adjust your exposure compensation for up to 2 stops in 1/3 stop increments. To adjust your exposure compensation, press the button just below the marker and rotate the dial accordingly. Also, a reminder that you have the compensation activated will appear in the viewfinder as a red flag above the shutter speeds. Remember to adjust the compensation back to 1x before your next shot. Below the exposure compensation button is a small lever, which is the locking mechanism for the interchangeable viewfinders. Press the little button and rotate the lever towards the viewfinder, and slide the finder backward to remove the viewfinder. To replace the viewfinder, line up the grooves on the bottom of the viewfinder with the rails along the top of the camera body. Press the finder forward and you should hear when the finder clicks the lock back into place. On the right, we have the shutter speed selector dial with 15 stops between a 4-second exposure and the max shutter of 1/2000th of a second, indicated by this white marker to the left of the dial. Also, for long exposures, a long time bulb mode is available where the shutter will remain open for however long you have the shutter button pressed down. This X, where the 1/75th mark should be, marks our flash sync speed. So, please ensure to have your shutter speed selector dial set to this speed or slower when utilizing an external flash. A quick note here, the LX has completely mechanical shutter speeds requiring no batteries above its sync speed of 1/75th of a second. However, all shutter speeds slower than that sync speed are electronic, and this will require batteries to shoot those lower speeds. We also have an automatic setting, allowing for an aperture priority control, where you can set your aperture manually on the lens, and the camera will automatically choose what shutter speed to use to produce a properly exposed image. Once the setting is selected, the dial is actually locked into place. To unlock the dial, press the button on top and rotate off the automatic setting. Next up, of course, we have our shutter release button, which is actually also a screw port for a remote shutter release. The shutter release features an extremely appreciated shutter locking switch. If the white dot on the switch is aligned with this little L, that means the lock is engaged. A nifty little feature of this locking mechanism can be used when shooting long exposures in bulb mode. Of course, set up the camera on a tripod, but if you don't have a remote shutter release with you, you can press down the shutter and rotate the lock, and this will hold the shutter open until the lock is released. Here is our lovely rapid wind film advance lever. This one has a 25-degree standoff position with a 120-degree full throw. Above the film advance is a windowed display featuring a frame counter that will not only count in reverse when rewinding your film or doing double exposures, but it also automatically resets when you open the camera back. And last, above the shutter speed dial contains a wind indicator to let the photographer know if their next shot is already wound when it's red, and it turns clear when the shutter is tripped. The LX deserves a whole special section dedicated to its advanced metering alone. The LX uses Integrated Direct Metering, or IDM, which is an off-the-film plane metering system, which was considered an extremely cutting-edge design for its time. Briefly, the meter is entirely internal to the camera box, under the main mirror. This is opposed to other designs that were dependent on the brightness of the interchangeable focus screen or viewfinder being used. This means the LX did not require any adjustments or compensations while using various accessories. That's pretty important for a system camera. Also, using the IDM, the LX has an extremely impressive automatic mode compared to its competition. The LX can officially produce long exposures down to 125 seconds. However, in practice, reported use indicates the exposures could be much longer than the other cameras using similar metering systems. This is an extremely impressive feat that makes the LX a very useful camera in dark situations and working with minimal available light. Also in automatic mode, the LX uses the exact same metering cells to estimate the exposure information for the viewfinder display as to control the automatic closure of the rear curtain. This is opposed to some of Pentax competitors that use separate and multiple metering cells for the display and for the actual exposure. So the LX eliminated any potential for discrepancies or lag time and streamlined a complex process by only using one metering system. Okay, let's take a deeper dive into the LX metering. The LX has a semi-transparent main mirror that lets light pass through to a small secondary mirror that's attached to the backside of the main mirror. The secondary mirror bounces light into the IDM at the base of the camera, and an estimated shutter speed is then calculated given the currently set lens aperture and film ASA. This value would then read out to the photographer on the side of the viewfinder by lighting the corresponding LED to a vertical list of potential shutter speeds. When the shutter is fired, the main mirror moves out of the way, and the secondary mini mirror will fold up out of the way with the main mirror. Now for most other cameras, and the LX in manual mode, at this point your shutter speed is fixed, and the preset speed will be completed as planned. However, during the exposure, in automatic mode, the LX performs a continuous metering off the film plane for the duration of each exposure to always produce the proper brightness of your image. The LX achieved this continuous metering by the combined reflectance off two different surfaces. First, mostly used for the calculation of the faster shutter speeds, the Pentax LX titanium shutter has a first curtain that is actually equipped with a reflective white dot pattern. So when the mirrors are moved up out of the way, the IDM mainly picks up the reflectance off the first curtain to calculate the shutter speed. However, the reflectance off the first curtain is only used to calculate shutter speeds above the flash sync speed. For shutter speeds below the flash sync speed, the reflected light off the actual film is used to calculate and refine the exact shutter speed needed to produce a properly exposed image. Hence the name off the film plane metering system. This system produces highly accurate and precise automatically produced exposures. Last here on metering, for flash photography with Pentax dedicated through the lens auto flash units, power output is also directly measured as it reaches the film plane. So you could use bounce flash, diffuse flash, and filtered flashes and produce accurate results without the need for any flash exposure compensation. Focus screens are ground glass plates used to focus light and assist with the sharpening of an image on a single focus plane. There are different available etched designs on focus screens to help a photographer frame and focus their scene, and these screens are entirely interchangeable on the Pentax LX. The LX focus screens usually come in these gray cases, equipped with special tweezers they call pincettes that assist with this process. See, there's a metal cage around the border of the focus screen holding it in place. There is this retainer clip that holds the cage in place. So to release that retainer clip, first set your camera upward and to allow gravity to work with you pulling the cage down. And if you use the supplied pincettes, there's these two little ears on each side. You can rest those within this notch on the front of the mirror box. Now slightly rotate up and pull towards you to press the pincet against the retainer clip. The cage will release and drop down. You can see along the side near the corner of the screen there's this tab. Our pincets are designed to pinch that tab between the little bunny ears, holding it in place and allowing us to manipulate the focusing screen securely. We not only use this tab to grab onto with the pincets to remove the screen, but this tab also reminds us the right-hand orientation the screen needs to be in, lined up with the groove on the cage when replacing the focusing screen. When replacing the screen, make sure the screen is sitting comfortably in the cage. I usually give the camera a quick mini shake to ensure the screen is secure in place. Then you can lift the screen back up to the retaining clip and press up until you hear a click. Back in its place. For the interchangeable viewfinders available for the Pentax LX, we have 3 eye-level pentaprism viewfinders, 2 waist-level finders, and a base system finder that accepts 3 more mini interchangeable finders. Let's go through these. First off, looking at the front of the viewfinders, we have the prominent Pentax branding. And on all but 3 of the finders, located below the branding, is a little black window that is actually reflecting the current aperture reading into the viewfinder so that you can see your selection during image acquisition. The 3 pentaprism finders, a standard viewfinder called the FA1. This came with an attached X-Sync hot shoe and a magnification of 0.9x. It's had a built-in diopter with a range of -1.5 to 0. The next pentaprism finder, called the FA1W, was basically a standard FA1, but with a wider range to adjust the diopter. This one had a range of -3 to +1. The wider diopter range comes at a slight cost of magnification with this finder at 0.84x. And the third pentaprism finder, with a lighter, more compact, cleaner look, the FA2. This finder has the same magnification as the FA1, but it did not contain the built-in hot shoe, nor did it contain the reflective aperture readout window. However, the FA2 has a very similar look to the earliest of the Pentax eye-level pentaprism viewfinders, such as on the Pentax AP, K, and S series cameras. Absolutely lovely. Next, we have our two waist-level finders. Neither of the waist-level finders have an aperture readout window. Also, the waist-level viewfinders do not have a pentaprism, so our observed image is a few reflections too short than what we're used to. This produces an image that appears reversed and may take a bit of a learning curve to get used to, but it allows for the most maximum magnification possible. First here we have the FE1, which contains a high magnification eyepiece, designed for precision focus macro work with an outstanding 1.3x magnification and a focusing type diopter correction of -5 to +4. And next we have the FF1, which is our more traditional waist level finder, really just displaying the reflected image off the mirror. There are no real optics in this finder. It contains light blinds on all sides to prevent loss of contrast, as well as a mini pop-up magnifier. Remember, to use that little magnifier, you have to hold the camera right up to your eye. Also, this finder folds down into an incredibly small and compact package, reminiscent of the very earliest Asahi Flex cameras. Beautiful. Just beautiful. The last of the main finders is actually a base system finder called the FB1. And this has 3 interchangeable mini finders. When using the base finder, the 3 attachment eyepieces have a bayonet coupler very similar to the K-mount. To remove the lens, you press the release button and rotate the piece counterclockwise. To attach the eyepiece, simply line up the dots and rotate clockwise. We'll actually start with the FD2, which is a standard eyepiece at 0.84x magnification. And with this eyepiece, we have ourselves a convenient 45-degree viewing angle, ideal for when sitting down at a table. Now we'll cover the FD1. It's a waist-level finder that they called the Magni eyepiece. Again, providing that convenient 45-degree viewing angle, this piece has a magnification of 0.95x and a focusing type diopter correction from -4.5 to +3.5. This next finder, called the FC1, rotates a full 180 degrees. Only a magnification of 0.55x, but this one allows the photographer to quickly and easily change between an eye-level finder and a waist-level finder. A diopter is a correction available with select viewfinders, allowing photographers who wear glasses to actually dial in their prescription strength. This allows them to use the camera without needing to use their glasses. Even if you don't wear glasses, you'll have to set the diopter to a 0 correction accordingly. For the FA1, FA1W, and FA2, we have this dial located on the bottom. To rotate this dial, an original Pentax diopter adjustment screwdriver was provided with the finders. However, if you don't have that, a normal flathead screwdriver will also do the trick. Attach the finder to the camera, but do not slide it in all the way. Allow the finder to hang over an edge just enough to reach that diopter adjustment with your screwdriver. Now, viewfinder to your eye, look at the split image center dot and turn that dial until the borders of that center spot come in crisp and sharp. Once complete, you can slide the finder the rest of the way in. The FE1 and FC1 magnifier type viewfinders are very similar. However, you rotate the focus type diopter while viewing the split image center spot and stopping when the border lines are sharp. Now you can attach your lens and be sure you are focusing your scenes accurately. When loading film, first, before you forget, set the ASA dial on your camera to that of the film speed you're loading into your camera. Next, pull the film rewind crank up to a position where it sits comfortably, and then pull up once again to release the spring-loaded back door. Place your film canister into the left side of the camera, and push the film rewind crank back down and into the canister. Pull the leader across the film runner guide rails and insert the leader into the film take-up spool. They called this design the Magic Needle Take-Up Spool for sure loading operation. It allows you to choose any of the openings between the needles, and when you advance the film, the needles press together, holding and binding your film in place as it advances. Now you can advance your film and release the shutter until the take-up sprockets engage with the film perforations. You can now close the back door, and the camera back pressure plate will hold the film flat to the image plane. You can now advance the film and release the shutter, repeating until the frame indicator is set to 0. You can tell your film is loaded correctly by watching the rewind crank rotate counterclockwise while you advance to the next frame. First, if you're new to photography, you may want to watch our video here on the basics of photography with the exposure triangle. This will demonstrate how shutter speed, aperture, and ISO work together to produce an image. Here's how I suggest you take your shots manually. When you're getting ready to go shooting, ensure your ASA is set to that of the film speed you've loaded into your camera. When you see a subject you want to photograph, first decide whether your desired image requires a critical control of depth of field or a critical control for motion. I'm going to explain what to do for critical control of depth of field by starting with my aperture setting on the lens. If you require critical control for motion, you would perform the same steps but start with setting your shutter speed first. Preset your aperture according to how much depth of field you may require. You'll need a lower f-stop aperture for a more narrow field of focus, or a higher aperture for a wider and deeper in-focus image. You'd come back to this step later if you needed more or less light to make your exposure. We'll quickly explain some of the things you'll see here in the viewfinder. At the very top and middle of our view is the f-stop currently selected and being reflected from the lens aperture. Along the side, at the very top, as a reminder, a red flag will appear if you have the exposure compensation dial adjusted. Below that constantly appears a list of the options that appear on the shutter speed dial. The currently selected shutter speed is indicated by a blue flag. The top A indicates the camera is set to automatic mode. We have 1/2000th of a second all the way down to 4 seconds. And an LTB stands for long time bulb exposures. Now when you're ready to take a shot, viewfinder to your eye, you'll frame your scene and manually focus. If you have pressed down on the shutter button, an LED will light up next to the shutter speed the camera estimates will produce a proper image given the current settings. When the blue flag is above that LED, you will produce an increasingly darker image than, shall I say, what is recommended. And if the blue flag is below that LED, you will produce an increasingly brighter image. The game will be to couple the location of the blue flag, your currently selected shutter speed, alongside the lit LED, the camera's estimation for the necessary shutter speed to produce a good exposure. If we cannot achieve a proper exposure, no matter the shutter speed we've selected, this is when we would need to adjust our aperture or other settings to acquire more or less light. Once we are happy with our exposure settings, we can now release the shutter. So those were the steps to follow if you're using a K-mount lens. But what do we do with the M42 lenses that don't have the necessary lever to indicate open aperture light meter readings? We'll have to use stop-down metering to acquire the proper exposure, explained in this next section. Quick note here, the lens must be capable of manual aperture selection. Many Pentax lenses have a switch to change between a manual and automatic aperture. Be sure the lens is set to a manual aperture control. Also, for M42 lenses, I always suggest a genuine Pentax M42 to K-mount adapter. They may be slightly more expensive, but from my personal experience, the cheaper ones are clumsy, inaccurate, and poorly machined. The genuine adapters are easy to install. You line up the dots on the mounts and rotate until the retainer clip snaps into place. To remove the adapter, I use a fingernail, but any object can be used to press the retainer clip back down while turning counterclockwise. We'll rotate the adapter back out of the mount. Okay, these are the following steps I use when adapting M42 lenses that require stop-down metering, which is more based on a shutter priority. First, ensure your ASA is set to that of the film speed loaded into your camera. Adjust your shutter speed accordingly to the ambient conditions, given a faster shutter speed for brighter conditions and a slower shutter speed for the darker conditions. Be sure to open your lens aperture to allow as much light in as possible. This makes manual focusing much easier to see. Next, viewfinder to your eye, you'll frame your scene and manually focus. Once we are sure of our focus, we're going to rotate our aperture ring on the lens while viewing the light meter LEDs through the viewfinder, stopping when we have successfully coupled our LED with the blue flag. You'll notice that as you stop down the aperture, your viewfinder will become increasingly dark. And this is why, when stop-down metering, you'll want to focus before you stop down the lens. However, once you are happy with your exposure settings, we can now release the shutter. In automatic mode, first rotate the shutter dial until it locks into the automatic setting on the top shutter speed dial. Next, select an aperture appropriate to capture the desired depth of field of your subject, and considering the ambient light conditions. Activate the camera's light meter with a half press on the shutter button, and look through the viewfinder. You can view the estimated shutter speed the camera has calculated, and make potential changes via the lens aperture or exposure compensation. And if all seems appropriate, go ahead and fire the shutter. When you get to the end of your film roll, and the frame counter should indicate the correct frame count, you'll feel the frame advance lever pull taut, and you won't be able to complete a full ratchet cycle. Press the film rewind release button on the bottom of the camera, flip open the film rewind crank on the top of the camera, and start rotating the crank clockwise. You can feel the tension and hear the film as it's being loaded back into the canister. You can also watch the film counter rotate backwards, unique to the LX. But at any rate, you can watch the film rewind all the way back to 0. Another tip here, if you stop rewinding just after the last exposure is rewound, the film leader will remain outside of the canister, making it so that you don't have to open the whole canister to grab the film when loading the film into the development reel. You'll also notice that the film counter has automatically reset, ready for that next roll. Thank you for joining us on this Pentax LX overview training. And if you like this content and you want to see more like it, please like and subscribe. Thanks.